Peter Brennan, one of the co-founders of Heaps Normal zero alcohol beer brand. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Build It, They'll Come.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Helen.
Now, I have to say to you, non-alcoholic beer, it's really an oxymoron in Australia, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a strange one to explain to people who are not aware of it sometimes. Yeah, it kind of
But I
goes a
mean,
little bit
beer in
against the grain.
Australia, it's always for 200 years, it's been full strength pretty much, although we've had low alcohol beers obviously in the last several decades. But
Yeah.
zero alcohol beer, tell me where that idea came from, Peter.
The idea came from kind of two areas really. One was a very personal level to me. My dad was a pretty abusive alcoholic. I lost him to suicide when I was 11 years old, and kind of grew up in the
Oh,
shadow
I'm
of
so
that my whole
sorry to hear
life. And
that.
no, don't be silly. It's all good. I talk about this stuff openly. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I've dealt with all the demons around that, so it's all good. And yeah, totally cool to chat about it. So there was a very personal connection for me, and I think subsequently, I never had a good relationship with alcohol growing up in my 20s. I was the guy who would, be the life of the party and then couldn't remember getting home and upset people that I cared about, and got myself into trouble. And the older I got, I'm 41. I'm happily married with three beautiful children, and just realized, it kind of dawned on me a few years ago that I definitely had an itch I needed to scratch from that perspective. So that was kind of the one part of it. The other part of it was I
But
run a
Peter,
branding
sorry,
studio.
just staying with that point, are you saying that you felt maybe you were heading along the same path as your dad and abusing alcohol too much?
Yeah, potentially. I think back in the day there wasn't as much talk around you know like alcohol consumption and mental health issues and things like that. And I was finding the older that I was becoming, I was starting to question my choice in certain things. I got to a point where I knew that alcohol was an issue for me. So did I avoid social occasions altogether, or did I go out and pretend I had an ear infection that I'd been pretending for the last 6 months that wasn't going away, and that was my excuse to not have a beer. So yeah, it was definitely scratching an itch. And like I was saying, on the same side of things, um, at the same time, I run a branding studio called Electric and Analog, and we create and reinvent consumer brands. And 3 years in, had a little bit of imposter syndrome. Could we create a brand on our own without a client telling us what they thought was the right thing to do? So had this real kind of desire to create a brand the way that I thought a brand could be created. And yeah, the stars aligned, and it turned into what we now know as Heaps Normal.
Oh, look, it's extraordinary. And we'll get into a couple of those points that you've raised. But you're on a mission, so the website says, and I read a lot of what you've all been talking about. You're on a mission to normalise mindful drinking. What does that mean in your view, Peter?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think we all have, everybody's different, and we all have different relationships with alcohol and what we think is normal. And one of the reasons that we called the business Heaps Normal is because we want to challenge what normal is to a lot of people. For some people, normal is going out and having 8 beers and not remembering how you got home, and missing work the next day. And for other people, normal is going out and having a coffee in the evening and not drinking alcohol. So we've always, when we started the business, we did the research, and we realized that you know people don't respond well to being told what to do. So we've never been preachy about alcohol consumption. We've never said alcohol's the devil, don't drink. We've just said, hey, find what works for you, and reinvent what normal means to you. And I think that's been a big part of why people are resonating with what we're doing as a brand and as a business.
So how did you four friends get together? Because there were four of you, and you forged ahead
Mhm.
with the idea to not only brew your own beer, but to have no alcohol in it. How did that come about? And did you all bring different things to the table?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I kind of knocked on a few doors in the early days and got politely laughed out of boardrooms and was told it would never be a thing. And, there wasn't really much interest for that. The first person that took me seriously was my co-founder and our CEO, whose name is Andy Miller. He got it straight away. He just went, yep, I see the vision. I understand what you're trying to do. And I'm all in. So, I'd done a little bit
Was
of
he
work
a
with Andy
mate
before.
or
And
right, or more a
yeah,
colleague?
yeah, more of a we'd done. Andy used to work at Young Henry's in Sydney, and we'd done some
Right.
work with them as a branding studio. So, him and I got to know each other a little bit through that. He'd since left the company and was consulting, and the timing worked out really well for him. And then we needed someone who could, make beer. So we reached out to Benny Holdstock, who had worked with Andy at Young Henry's as well. And, Benny's an incredible brewer. He's worked at the likes of Grifter and Four Pines and, like I said, Young Henry's and Little Creatures and a few others. And he was the guy that really came in and kind of went, okay, this is a challenge. Like, I've never made a beer without any alcohol before, but he took the bull by the horns and moved forward and created a beer that has, just under 0.5% alcohol, which anything under that can be classified as non-alcoholic. So, to give you some perspective, a ripe banana can have 0.5% alcohol. A
Oh,
bottle of orange
really? I
juice that's
didn't
been
know
in the
that.
fridge. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like the sugars just ferment and naturally make under
Right.
0.5% alcohol. So that's we use a very particular yeast that micro ferments just under that, so we don't take anything out, which is the kind of historical way of making non-out beer. Um, and we pulled in Geordie Smith, who I've known since we were children. We used to surf with each other when we were kids, and the four of us kind of went to town and we made 1,200 blank cans and we put a sticker on them and sent them out as far and wide as we could to people in the hospitality industry. And we got a very common response. So people would drink it and they go, "This is delicious," and they'd start naming all the flavor profiles, and then we'd say, "What alcohol percent do you think this is?" And they'd say 4.5, 5%, and then we said it's non-alcoholic, and we just saw jaws hit the floor and people couldn't quite believe it. And I think that's when we realized we were potentially onto something.
Right. So again, we'll get into a bit more detail of all that, but essentially you're saying you didn't and you don't have to remove the alcohol. It's never in there in the first place.
Correct. So there's two typical ways to make non-alcoholic beer, which is traditionally how beer, like non-alcoholic beers has been around since the 1970s. It's
Yeah.
nothing new. So you can either boil the alcohol off at the end, or you could do this kind of vacuum reverse osmosis, vacuum distillation, it's called. And the problem with both of those is it takes a lot of the flavors and the ingredients out at the end. So typically a lot of the more
Right.
traditional non-alcoholic beers are quite watered down, a little bit, a beer connoisseur would argue that it's lost all its flavor and tastes like fizzy
Yeah.
water, which definitely didn't do the category any favors, should I say. And what we did, we kind of really innovated on the production process. So we follow pretty much the same process as producing normal beer. It has all the same ingredients. We just don't take anything out at the end. We use a yeast that micro ferments just under 0.5%. So nothing's taken out, and it allows you to have this full flavored mouthfeel of what you would call a normal alcoholic beer without the alcohol.
Right. Now, your website rather playfully says a designer, a brewer, a pro surfer, and a ginger walk into a bar. Now, which one are you?
I'm the designer, even though I do have a ginger beard coming through between the white hairs. Yeah, my background's design. I've studied graphic design straight out of school, and I've kind of built my career around being a designer. So yeah, I'm currently head of brand. I'm one of the co-founders at Heaps Normal, and I guess everything brand kind of falls on my head in a way. But we all kind of work together as a team. We've got 23 staff now, and the four of us are co-founders, are very active in the business. So yeah, it's definitely a team effort.
Yeah, amazing. What made you think, let's just go back to the beginning again. What made you think that Australia was ready for a zero alcohol beer? I mean, did you actually do any real market research?
We did. We didn't pay a research agency to go out and do that kind of stuff. I think as an early stage entrepreneur, there's some magic in that naivety and having a gut feeling in things. I traveled a lot for work. I've been to the US quite a few times in Japan on business and recognized that there was a kind of growing movement of younger people in particular in Tokyo and LA, for example, that were cutting down their alcohol consumption when going out, and that was, a real big kind of factor for us to consider. And we did the research and realized, alcohol costs the economy billions of dollars a year in terms of disease and car accidents and domestic violence and all that kind of stuff. So we really felt in our heart there was something there. And like I said, we all had different reasons as well, not all of us had alcoholism in the family, but Geordie Smith, for example, as a co-founder, he's a pro surfer. He's consistently top five on the world tour in the last few years. And for him, he wanted to have a competitive edge. He's come runner-up to being the world champion twice, and he wanted to have that competitive edge that would allow him to win a world title. With Benny, it was very much the brewing challenge.
He just doesn't want to hang. He just didn't want the hangover the next day, but still wanted to be social. Wanted to have the flavour and the taste of beer.
Yeah, exactly. I think as a society we've become kind of, conditioned that we have a drink. We drink to commiserate, we drink to celebrate, and everything in between. And it's just become part of our DNA as humans. In the Western world, we grow up and we see mom and dad having a glass of wine with dinner, and we just think it's normal. And we're challenging that. It doesn't have to be normal to go out and drink alcohol and not remember things in the morning.
What were the other two's motivations?
So Andy's traveled a lot. He's done some wild things. He traveled through China in his pajamas, amongst other crazy things. So he's fascinated with culture change, and he definitely saw that as a challenge that he wanted to kind of tackle and take on board. And for Benny, as a production, as a brewer, we were under the the opinion that there wasn't any good non-alc beers out there. So we wanted to try and make one that tasted really good and people thought it was a normal beer and could enjoy it in the same way.
Yeah. So Peter, take me back to that beginning time. Were you almost laughed out of town?
Yeah, kind of. I met with 3 established breweries through our network and walked in with a pitch deck and an idea and kind of sold them on the size of the market and the branding and everything else, and was, politely told this probably isn't going to work, and it's a nice idea, but there wouldn't really be a market for it. But like a dog without a bone, I just couldn't let it go, and kept barking up the wrong trees until I found the right tree, which was Mr. Andy Miller, and here we are. We turned 2 at the end of this month, so we're still very, very early days, but the business has gone from strength to strength, and we're super excited.
Yeah. So just to be clear, did you actually want to be beer brewers first and foremost, or was it really this idea to make a beer with no alcohol that was the driving force at the start?
It was definitely the latter. We don't want to make normal alcoholic beer. I don't think it's ever going to be part of our DNA. We're a dedicated non-alcoholic beer company. When we kind of went to market, there wasn't Carlton Zero wasn't live yet by any means. It was probably just about to be launched, and it kind of launched just before we did. And but we've always been a dedicated non-alcoholic beer company. We've got 2 kind of core SKUs in our range, and we've done a special release as well. And as we build out that portfolio of beers, they're all going to be absolutely non-alcoholic. So yeah, we never wanted to be a normal beer company, that's for sure.